If this story touched your heart and you love animals, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. In the town of South Haven, Maine, spring always arrived in a rush. In 2022, the ice melt was especially swift, and the Willow River broke its banks. The forests around town brimmed with water, footpaths turned into creeks, and dips along the shore became hidden traps. Not far from the old bridge that marked the start of a country road lived Maddie, a stray dog with thick dark fur and sharp, intelligent eyes. She had long since stopped trusting humans, but stayed close to nearby farms, surviving on scraps offered by elderly residents and school children. One gray afternoon, the wind carried a sharp, panicked sound. Maddie froze, ears twitching. Downriver, something flailed in the rushing current. A small figure, barely visible between the swells. A puppy, white and russet, too young to swim, caught in the icy flow. Its legs churned against the water, trying to find footing that wasn't there. Maddie didn't hesitate. Her muscles tensed, and with a single leap, she bolted from the muddy river bank and dove into the torrent. The cold slammed into her body, but she kicked hard against the pull. Her eyes stayed locked on the struggling pup, her paws slicing through the current. The puppy yelped again, a weak, desperate sound swallowed by the roar of the swollen river. She pushed forward, fighting not just the water, but time. The current tugged at her sides. Spinning debris brushed her legs, but Maddie pressed on. The puppy slipped beneath the surface once, twice, and then her teeth found fur. She clamped gently, turning toward a fallen tree wedged diagonally across the flow, the only shelter from the water's grip. With one last push, she dragged him up onto the slick trunk and hauled herself beside him. The tree trembled beneath their weight, the river snarling below. The puppy shook, barely conscious, and Maddie curled around him without pause. Her body, soaked and shivering, pressed against his tiny form, shielding him from the wind. Above them, the sky hung heavy with clouds, and the world seemed to pause, just long enough for hope to hold its breath. The current surged violently around them. Maddie swam close to the surface, her head lifted high above the churning water, eyes fixed on the flailing figure ahead. The puppy was slipping under again and again, each gasp for air more frantic, each kick weaker. His limbs no longer moved with intention, just reflex, a body beginning to give in. Maddie lunged forward, closing the gap with powerful strokes. Her jaws found the loose scruff of his soaked neck just before he vanished again beneath a swell. With a strained grunt, she jerked her head back and began dragging him toward the one thing that stood out in the chaos. A thick tree trunk jammed halfway across the river, caught between rocks and current, half submerged and trembling under the force of the water. Her legs ached, lungs burned, and her soaked coat dragged her down. But she didn't let go. The climb was slow. Maddie pushed herself up onto the slick bark with claws scrabbling for hold, never loosening her grip on the pup. She collapsed half over him, panting, her legs trembling from exertion. The tree groaned beneath them, shifting slightly with every surge of the river. The banks were far, steep, and glazed with mud. The water that clung to her fur was ice. Escape was not an option. Not yet. The puppy squirmed weakly, his body racked with trembling. His tiny frame emitted high-pitched whimpers, more from fear than pain. Maddie curled herself around him, drawing his body tightly against her own. Her muzzle brushed over his ears, his paws, his cold little nose. Her tongue worked in short, purposeful strokes, as if trying to coax warmth back into him by will alone. The wind cut through the forested riverbanks, rattling leaves and driving the mist sideways across the water. Maddie pressed her eyes shut for a moment and buried her snout deeper into the puppy's neck, shielding him from the gusts. The trunk rocked beneath them. They were no longer swimming, but they were still surrounded by the same threat. The river hissed at their sides, licking up against the bark like it meant to claim them still. But Maddie didn't move. She wouldn't move. Above them, the world raged with water and wind. But between her ribs, a heartbeat held steady. and against her chest, a smaller one answered. Hours had passed. The river's surge had softened, but the road remained submerged, the landscape around the bridge still cut off by the flooding. No one walked the path. No voices called out. The world had moved on, unaware that, out on a half-submerged trunk in the middle of the swollen water, two lives clung to one another in silence. Maddie hadn't moved. She lay wrapped around the puppy like a living barrier. Her body trembled from cold, her muscles cramped from stillness, but her instincts refused to release her hold. Every so often, when the pup began to slip into sleep, she would raise her head and release a long, low howl. Not a cry for help, not anymore, but a call to keep the tiny heartbeat near her from fading. Each note was deliberate, vibrating with effort. A voice spent not on panic, but on preservation. The wind had changed by afternoon, growing heavier with rain. Mist clung to the banks, curling into the branches overhead. The puppy stirred only slightly, his nose tucked under Maddie's leg. His body pressed so tightly against hers that only the faintest motion gave away his breath. Maddie's own breathing had grown shallow. Her eyes fluttered, her strength slowly giving way to cold and time. But still she lifted her head and howled, again and again, until finally, near evening, something broke through the gray silence. The crunch of tires on gravel, a thin beam of light swaying through mist. A bike. A teenage boy named Luke was riding home from a short fishing trip. He'd taken the back trail to avoid the traffic on the main road, the path that wound along the flooded river. When the faint, unnatural sound reached his ears, a drawn-out cry, oddly rhythmic, he braked hard. He walked to the edge of the embankment, gripping his handlebars, and when his eyes adjusted to the gloom below, he saw them. A dog, dark-coated, soaked to the bone, lying half on a trunk barely above waterline. Her limbs were curled protectively around a trembling, pale-furred puppy. Her head was raised. Her eyes, deep, hollow with exhaustion, were fixed on him. Not pleading, just waiting. It was the kind of look that didn't ask for anything, but gave everything. One Luke would remember for the rest of his life. Luke ran as fast as his legs would carry him, slipping through puddles and over half-hidden roots. His breath came in sharp bursts. The image of the dog and puppy burned behind his eyes. When he burst through the back door, he didn't need to say much. His father, a firefighter who'd seen his share of emergencies, was already grabbing his jacket. Two neighbors joined them with climbing rope and a weathered gear bag. They knew the river. They knew the bridge. Within 10 minutes, they were there. The descent was difficult. Rain-soaked clay made every step treacherous. The current below tugged at the trunks and branches, hiding sudden drops and sharp limbs beneath the surface. But they moved quickly, one man anchoring the rope while another, Evan, a quiet man with a climber's balance, started across the slick remains of the felled tree. The dog didn't move. Maddie remained where she was, her body still wrapped loosely around the puppy. She didn't bark. She didn't growl. Only her eyes followed every step of the man approaching. When he finally reached them, crouching low and extending a gloved hand toward the pup, Maddie tensed, but didn't resist. She held her breath until she felt the hands close gently around the pup's damp fur. And then, only then, did she step back. Evan lifted the small bundle into his arms, wrapping the puppy in a blanket. The pup whimpered once, then went still again, eyes barely open. Evan turned to signal, but as he reached out toward Maddie, she let out a warning hiss, not of aggression, but of confusion, of protective fear. Her body lowered again, unsure, coiled in silent resistance. That was when Luke stepped forward. He lowered himself carefully onto the muddy edge, moving slowly, ignoring the cold as he crept closer to where Maddie stood. He crouched beside the man and extended his hand, palm up, fingers steady, letting the wind carry his scent. Maddie hesitated. Then she stepped forward. The boy's scent stirred something in her memory. He was the one who left food behind the school on quiet afternoons. A crust of bread, a half sandwich. Never loud, never chasing, just presence. She nudged his hand, nose cold and wet. And when he gently touched her shoulder, she leaned into it, just slightly. That was all the permission they needed. Evan secured the harness around her with quick, practiced motions, and together they began the slow journey back across the flood-drenched tree. 2 lives no longer stranded. They named the puppy Split, for the dark streak running along his back, and because he had been rescued in the space between 2 worlds. River and land. Fear and safety. The vet confirmed he was healthy, just exhausted and chilled. With warmth, food, and quiet, Split began to recover. His small frame filled out, his eyes grew clearer, and his steps more sure. But he never strayed far from the one who had kept him alive. Maddie stayed too. She didn't become a pet in the traditional sense. She didn't curl up at the foot of the bed or learn to play fetch. She chose the porch, the back shed, the soft earth near the apple trees. She stayed on the edge of things, but never far. Luke and his family understood. They didn't try to train her or coax her inside. They left doors ajar, bowls of food beneath the steps, blankets under the eaves. Maddie made her own way to belonging, and that, somehow, made her part of the family more completely than if they had tried to force it. Split was different. He was all tail wags and tumbling paws, an explosion of life that followed Maddie everywhere. He tripped over garden tools, chewed on fence posts, barked at the wind. But every night, when the house quieted and the sky turned the color of coal dust, he curled beside Maddie and tucked his head against her ribs, his breath syncing with hers. She never moved until he was asleep. The neighbors started noticing them, the way they moved like one being, the way Maddie watched Split with a gaze that held something deeper than duty. She wasn't just a rescuer. She had become a keeper, a guardian not just of a life, but of the space that life was allowed to grow into. Some said she reminded them of something old, a loyalty unshaken by hardship, a heart that didn't ask for anything in return. No leash, no collar, just an open gate and a dog who had chosen to stay. 6 months had passed. The flood was a memory now, whispered about in the town diner, half faded in newspaper clippings on the bulletin board near the post office. But for Luke, and for the 2 lives he had watched change, it hadn't faded. One soft afternoon, when the sky was stretched with clouds and the air smelled faintly of river mud and pine, Luke took Split and Maddie back to the place. The Willow River had long since retreated to its usual course. The banks were firm again, though still scarred in places, and the tree, the one that had caught them, lay with its roots exposed, half bleached by sun and time. Maddie stepped ahead without prompting. Her gait was slower now, more measured, as if she understood the gravity of return. She walked straight to the downed tree, to the space where the current had once tried to take everything. She sniffed the ground, circled once, and then, quietly, lay down. Split, bigger now, but still with that unsure, hopeful bounce in his step, nestled beside her. His body no longer trembled from cold, but he leaned into her anyway, as if the imprint of that long day still lived inside his bones. Luke sat a little behind them, not wanting to intrude. He watched the 2 of them, framed by roots and branches, by wind and memory, and felt something in his chest shift. Maddie hadn't been a fighter in the usual sense. She hadn't barked for help, hadn't tried to drag the puppy to shore with brute force. She had simply stayed. That was her rescue. She had wrapped herself around life and held on, and sometimes, maybe most times, that was enough to make the difference. People in South Haven still talked about the flood, but what stayed with them even more than the water was what followed it, the image of a dog on a log, refusing to let go of what she had saved. No medals were given, no monuments raised. But if you walked past the bend in the river at dusk, sometimes you'd see her there, Maddie, lying quiet as the water rolled by, Split curled close, Luke watching from the grass. Sometimes being a hero isn't about the moment everything changes. Sometimes it's about what and who you refuse to let go of.